You have made it deep into the Reinhardswald forest, to the small town of Sababurg and its beautiful castle, Dornrosenschloss, or the Sleeping Beauty Castle. The first words that come into mind for a lot of people when looking at the castle is simply enchanting. No wonder. The castle has a long history by itself, but one cannot talk about the castle without mentioning the brothers Grimm. The two famous German fairy tale writers, Wilhelm and Jakob Grimm, are the ones who created the classical stories about Snow White, Cinderella, Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, and many more. They also wrote the story about the Sleeping Beauty. Since many of the brothers Grimm's fairy tales were inspired by their own lives and their surroundings, people started to wonder where the inspiration for Sleeping Beauty came from. Already in the 19th century, after the publication of the brothers Grimm's fairy tales, people imagined this very castle to be the place where the Sleeping Beauty tale must have come from. Partly because the brothers Grimm spent time in the surrounding areas, and also due to the ivy-covered castle's sleepy look with its magnificent past and its hedges of thorns. The castle was said to be sleeping, as it was partly a ruin at the time the brothers Grimm lived. In the early 19th century, the castle was abandoned as a residence, and it rapidly fell into disrepair, converting the castle to a wild, romantic old ruin. But let's wind back time and talk more about the castle's history. Once upon a time, the nearby village of Gottsbüren was seen as a holy site for Christians during the early 14th century. This drew many pilgrimages to the place, which rapidly increased the city's fame. In order to protect the village and the pilgrims, the Archbishop of Mainz founded the castle known as Zapfenburg in the year 1334. The castle's current name, Sababurg, comes from the legendary goddess of Saba, and adopted at the end of the 16th century. Anyway, the castle soon became the object of territorial disputes between the regions of Mainz, Paderborn, Brunswick, and Hessen. The castle eventually split between Mainz and Hessen, and later passed on to the local landlords in 1429. However, the castle quickly lost its political and military importance, and thus fell more and more into ruins. In the late 15th and early 16th century, the castle was used as a base for the local forester and as a place to keep wild horses. Later, Philip I had the castle reconstructed in 1522 into a hunting lodge, which he used frequently for hunts and festivals. An area outside the castle, around 1 square kilometer, was laid out in 1571 and surrounded by a long wall. Inside were a vast range of northern wild animals. This served as a hunting ground for the local rich landowners and their friends. During the 30-Year War, the castle was badly damaged, but later rebuilt between 1649 and 1651. The so-called Welsh domes you can see on top of the two towers dates back to the period. In the 18th century, the castle interior was embellished considerably, and it was later refurnished in splendid fashion. However, as mentioned earlier, the castle was later abandoned as a residence. Also, during the part of the 19th century, some areas of the castle were demolished and the material used for other building projects. This gave the castle the ruinous and wild look which inspired the brothers Grimm to write their story of Sleeping Beauty. Around 100 years later, during the early 20th century, the long sleep was over and the castle was kissed awake and restored for visitors. Today, the surrounded wildlife area, which started as a hunting ground for the local landlords, has now grown into a full-fledged zoo with focus on northern wild animals. You can now observe a multitude of different animals at Sababurg's zoological garden. The over 650-year-old castle itself is not only a site for visitors who want to experience the enchanting beauty of the real fairy tale castle, but it also houses a romantic hotel, a theatre, and a restaurant, which I'm sure you've already noticed. If you have the time, I can recommend a stroll in the medieval castle garden. The garden grows herbs, vegetables, flowers, and of course, roses. If you're visiting during the rose season, this is a must-see. Castle Sababurg is one of the highlights of the scenic fairy tale route in Germany, a route which takes you along the origins of many of the brothers Grimm's fairy tales. It is easy to understand why the brothers were so captivated by the enchanting beauty this castle holds. Just like in the story of the Sleeping Beauty, or the Beauty in the Forest, as the story is sometimes called, the wild returns to take over this castle, which is exactly what happened to the castle here in Sababurg.